in the dead of night, full of echo. Concrete jungle, dreams bust to grow. Mets in the air, chase glory, no fear. Broken bats, the heart steer clear. OMG, the chaos, what a scene. Streets buzzing like a machine. Greenness from the shadows, chills on my spine. Past haunts, the future shine. Come back to the night, keep dreams alive. Fighting tooth and nail just to survive. City's heartbeat echoes in our chant. Grit and glory is all we want.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another show and probably the final one talking about the 2024 season as we recap the 2024 season and give our player and coaches grade throughout the roster on this live stream. Hopefully everybody is doing okay. I know it's not the shows that we wanted to do. We would love to be doing pre and post for the World Series, but we didn't get far enough and we fell short in the NLCS. But we get to talk about our grades going forward here for the 2024 season. Chris, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I completely agree. I wish we were talking about a World Series matchup for our New York Mets today. Unfortunately, it wasn't in the cards. Probably, like you said, the last 2024 talking points for us regarding this special magical season and this magical team. Before we get into some offseason talk, right? And trying to build this team up to be that true championship contender in 2025. And that starts for me tonight. I'm dropping a video at 8 p.m. talking about the David Stearns press conference that we heard just yesterday, or was it today? I think it was yesterday. Anyways, it doesn't matter. That video is going up. So I appreciate everyone being here. Again, a bunch of off-season content from myself, Rob, the both of us combined. Don't go anywhere. We got you covered. There's a lot to talk about with this team, but I'm ready to give some season grades, man. I'm ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, it's unfortunate that we had to end our season that way. We're very proud of this team, as we talked about in the final post game of Game 6 of the NLCS. It was a great season, nonetheless, considering the expectations for this team. But it shows you what you were missing in these playoffs. If you really think about it, right? You see the two teams in the World Series, right? What are the Mets? Do the Mets have stars? Absolutely. But they're missing that other difference maker. And you've seen it with the Dodgers. You've seen it with the Yankees. Even though I don't think the Yankees, I think if it wasn't for Soto, they wouldn't be there. But other guys came through that we needed to count on when your big boys weren't doing it every single day in the playoffs. Somebody else stepped up. And you always need that other guy. And, the lack of a quote-unquote ace, Chris, I think became a bigger issue in the playoffs because as much as we considered Manaea our ace, he's not a true ace. As great as he pitched, he wasn't that true ace. And I think the Mets lacked that. And you see what happened in Game 6 when he basically ran out of gas. So I just don't get your final thoughts on that before we get into our grades.
Yeah, and I mentioned it in my video that's upcoming at 8 p.m. tonight, is that this was a season that Sean Manaea really stepped up in the absence, unfortunately, of Kodai Senga. And he really became that ace, right, for the New York Mets. But you saw he kind of fizzled out as the postseason came along because in the regular season, he pitched 181 and 2/3 innings. That's the most innings by far he's pitched since 2021. That's about, I want to say, give or take 61 innings more than he pitched last season. So, he was tired and it looked like he was fatigued with an ERA over 4.20 in the postseason, and that debacle of a start that he had in the second game, in that Dodgers series in the NLCS. So I completely agree with you. And that's something that we're going to be talking about all off season, in terms of not only retaining Sean Manaea, who's inevitably going to opt out of his deal, and also Luis Severino. Obviously, Jose Quintana is a free agent as well, but just everybody else that's on the market to try to bolster up this rotation to not have that sort of situation where you're going to have guys burn out later in the season. I think that's very important. That's a very good point by you.
Yeah, it sucked because you wanted him to just get through that, and it is what it is, and that leads us to our grades for the 2024 season. And as you see the lineup here, we're going to go through the coaches. We're going to go through the bullpen, rotation, infield, and outfield through that order. And at the end, we're going to give our overall team grade that is just going to be off our heads, right? Just this, you know what? And we're only talking about the season here. We're not talking about I don't like to group in the playoffs with that because I don't think that's fair to certain players that help you get there and, you know, maybe not done enough in the postseason, but other guys stepped up. But it's mostly overall season. That's why it's the season grades, not, you know, postseason grades. But we'll start with the coaches. And, you know, I saw Chris's grades when he sent it to me while I was doing the slides, and I'm like, okay, tough grader over here. And you know what? I'm a tough grader too. So we're going to get into it. So Chris, I'm going to make you start with the coaches' grades for you. Take it away.
Yeah. You know, it's a season where obviously you got to give Carlos Mendoza all the flowers being in his rookie campaign as a manager for the New York Mets and where he kind of took this team, especially when it didn't start off too hot. And, you know, he definitely got snubbed for manager of the year. For those of y'all who don't know, they gave it to Pat Murphy of the Brewers, who is also deserving. But when I look at, right, the two teams head to head, and obviously I don't think they grade and take into account the postseason into that equation. I understand the Brewers were in a terrible spot given their offseason, right? Especially with the leadership in Stearns and whoever, you know, else counsel moving on. But listen, that was Mendy's award to lose. And just like the baseball writers do and the media does, they snub another New York Met, a member of the New York Mets organization. So, you know, going up and down the list, obviously I was very hard on the hitting coaches. Coming into the season, we kind of were wondering what the sort of roles and the distinction of the roles were going to be between Eric Chavez and Jeremy Barnes. And I really don't think they hit the mark in terms of making it clear what that distinction was. Now, what I will say is that if I was grading this based off of the overall production of the Mets offensive unit as a whole, I mentioned this many times throughout our content in the season, is that the New York Mets were at times a juggernaut type of offense, right? They came close to top 10 in every single offensive category outside of batting average, right, around the league, where they came in at number 12. But I just look at the sort of philosophies. I look at the inconsistencies, right, of the lineup through and through. I look at guys that had career lows in terms of just performances and numbers alike. Francisco Alvarez is a name that comes to mind, and you'll see my grade for Francisco Alvarez. It's a little bit more average than me being hard on him because I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But Brandon Nimmo, obviously Pete Alonso, we'll get into all those guys in terms of the lineup. But really, my grade for the lineup is going to tell the story about why I gave both of these coaches, the co-hitting coaches, a low mark. And Jeremy Hefner, listen, I was hesitant to give him like a C+ because I really do think at worst he was average, which is what I see you graded Jeremy Hefner as. And by the way, for those of you all who are watching this right now, Rob and myself had no idea what I had no idea what he was grading these guys, and he had no idea. Well, actually, he did know what I was grading these guys because I had to send it to him to make the slides, but I had no idea what his grades were. So the difference here in Jeremy Hefner is, right, I take a look at a rotation and just the pitching aspect of this team in general that came number 3 in walks. That obviously needs to be cleaned up. That was an abysmal stat for the New York Mets. Anytime you're top 5, even top 10 in walks in the league, that is a recipe for trouble. And they did find themselves in trouble. But, you know, I kind of liked what he did with some of the guys that were coming in that were unknowns, right? Sean Manaea, we just talked about, had a phenomenal season, right? You know, whether the mechanical adjustment was Sean Manaea's and Sean Manaea's alone, I would have to think that Jeremy Hefner had a little bit of a say in terms of just critiquing and sort of tweaking that mechanic after he started to implement it. And then up and down the board too, you take a look at guys like, you know, Luis Severino, who was also in the same camp. We didn't know what version of Luis Severino we were going to get. This pitching was respectable, and they were league average, right? The team whip was, they came in at number 19, and the team ERA came in at number 17, right? And that's kind of where they fell in just in terms of being league average. But I take a look at that and I take a look at the personnel. This was a rotation, Rob, that we were talking about that was a major question mark coming into the season with the names that were jotted down on the list. And then you take a look at the Kodai Senga injury and when that happened, and we knew that we weren't going to have him for a decent chunk of the season, which ended up being 99.5% of the season. I think all things considered, Jeremy Hefner did just enough to earn himself a little bit above average, which is why I gave him a B. But I was not impressed with Barnes or Chavez, and you can tell with my grades for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously we were on board with Mendoza, right? I did I wanted to do my grades before you actually sent yours, so I didn't want to have like a little bit of a maybe that's true moment, So I just wanted to do my grades prior to you giving me your grades, and that's what I did, right? I mean, you could see where we were when it came to agreeing with Mendoza. We're kind of a little off on Hefner, but the hitting coaches we're almost there. Connected on that. With Mendoza, I mean, he should have got manager of the year, right? We don't want to take postseason into consideration because it is the season grades. Mendoza did a great job. Obviously no manager is perfect, but he kept this team afloat when everybody was destroying his team through the media. Internally players were probably talking amongst themselves about trade deadlines and where they might be going and all that stuff as well. 0-5, 11 games under. He kept this team together. And that's not easy to do, especially in New York. Regardless if he was, in New York as a bench coach all those years with the Yankees, he was a guy that I think a lot of people were surprised how even keel he was. He didn't get too high, didn't get too low, and that is something that I appreciated from a manager because we've seen managers in the past, lose the team like a Luis Rojas, like a Mickey Callaway, a Buck Showalter who had a great year in 2022, completely lost the team in 2023. So to see him keep that even keel and that no highs, no lows, but keeping that in the middle, I think helped this team tremendously, not overhype everything that was being said by the media and everything like that. And I think that's why Mendoza deserves the A. Jeremy Hefner, I gave him a C. I know you did give him a B. I gave him a C only because of the first half, or the first 2 months, I should say, where we knew we didn't have Kodai Senga. I think he was the one that needed to do a better job with this rotation as a whole. I know the pitching wasn't really bad for the most part in the first 2 months of the season. It was mostly the offense, but I thought if he would have done a little bit of a better job to, I guess, telling the Minayas of the world, the Severino, because if you really talk to when you hear Minaya talk about he watched Chris Sale and then he changed his delivery, this wasn't him and Hefner going to the pitching lab and trying to fix something, trying to fix mechanics or change mechanics. Severino, the same thing. It was more of his sleep and diet. That was a big deal with him to try to stay healthy and keep himself fresh for the entire season. That wasn't Hefner. So a lot of that was basically their own personal doing, and it wasn't really Hefner. And we've seen throughout the year when the walks continued to be a problem throughout the season, and then you saw it lead to the postseason. I thought Jeremy Hefner could have done a better job. I'm not saying no to yell at these guys or anything like that, but I think he could have found a way to get guys throwing more strikes. I think he fell in love with a lot of the breaking balls and the off-speed pitches we've seen Alvarez continue to call and the pitchers continue to call and not shake off. Tells me that Hefner, Alvarez, and the pitcher were mostly on the same page with that, and I didn't necessarily like that. That's why I gave Hefner a C. And the hitting coaches, I mean, it was terrible for 2 months. Like, they were non-existent. If it wasn't for the supporting cast and a little bit of the pitching, this team could have been buried a long time ago. We would have never had the season we had and get into Game 6 of the NLCS. Barnes, I almost gave an F, but I kind of used that postseason when he told Alonso, look at the glove of the Brewers closer, and that kind of changed a little bit.
I thought no postseason was being taken into account here, Rob. You're cheating on me, man.
Because he was the hitting coach last year, and then he's the assistant now. I was like, you know what? I gotta give that to him a little bit. That was our season right there at that moment. Not saying that Alonso would have hit the home run if he knew or not, but it was still, I was like, I just had to put that in there a little bit. But I give these to two hitting coaches in Barnes and Chavez. So that is the coaches, guys. If you agree to disagree or want to agree or, hate everything that we just graded here, let us know in the comments. And,
one more thing for me, Rob.
Yeah, go ahead.
In relation to Jeremy Hefner, I will say, even though I gave him a B, I'm sure they're going to retain him. This guy has fought through multiple regimes now with the Mets. Somehow he's still here. Something they like about him, right? And I think he did a respectable job. He needs to be more aggressive in terms of going out there, for me, showing some fire, because it almost seems like he relies on the guys in the infield, namely Francisco Lindor, to hype these guys up. As the pitching coach, that's, the other players can do so, right? That's their job. And that's Lindor's obviously a captain, or he should be a captain for a reason. I consider him one, but you got to go out there with the fire. If the guy's not throwing strikes, I need to see some passion from you. And I need to see you more out there more often. Let's be real. He waited a long time to go out there in certain occasions. And when you see a guy that doesn't have it, yes, there's a certain degree of let him go out there and figure it out, right? Before I come out and say something. But there's also certain situations where you got to go out there right away and prevent any further bleeding. And that's an area that, if he sticks around, which I'm sure he's going to, right? We haven't heard anything about his name potentially being, let go this offseason. So I'm expecting him to be here. He needs to be more aggressive in that category. And that's what I'll leave it at.
Yeah, I do 100% agree with you on Hefner with that point. Again, you know what? Around the league, a lot of people like him. Like, a lot of people talk about if he gets fired, he's getting picked up by another team quickly. So if around baseball respects him and thinks he's really good, then the Mets do have something in Hefner. It's just that maybe he's got to change his way a little bit. But again, if he hasn't already over the last couple of years and a couple of regimes, who knows if he ever will. But again, maybe if he had better pitchers, maybe he would look like a genius if they actually pitch well. But you just never know, right? All right, so we're going to get to the players now. We're going to start with the bullpen in just a second. Just so everybody knows, when it comes to the players, we're getting guys that actually played during the season that ended up basically on the final roster before the postseason that actually made a difference during the season. So if you don't see a guy on there, you know why we're not, because it didn't make or break this team, because they didn't put enough innings in there to really say, it helped this team or hurt this team. So we're going to start with the bullpen grades for both of us. And I'm going to make Chris go ahead and talk about the bullpen right over here. Chris, take it away.
I was so scared that you were going to put anything other than an F for Adam Ottavino, man. I was so damn scared. I'm happy to see that, because that guy was absolutely just awful. And it resorted for him to go out there and try to win back the fan base, which somehow he did, right? He tricked this fan base into believing that he was going out there and posting zeros for a stretch of the season, which he was in the lowest of leverage situations, which does not really equate to a veteran guy that re-signed, that wanted to be here and make a contribution to the team. Quite simple. Adam Ottavino didn't cut it, and he's going to, I believe, the Dominican Winter League to showcase his talents in hopes of impressing some other team, but it's not going to be the New York Mets. Phil Maton, you know what? He had a decent, and I almost did factor in the playoffs here for Phil Maton, because, it's kind of hard not to. He had such a drastic difference of a regular season being the first trade for the New York Mets in that trade deadline season. They needed bullpen help desperately. I believe that was when Edwin Diaz was still suspended, maybe towards the end of his suspension. I'm not sure if I'm getting the timeline correct there, but it doesn't matter. He was solid as nails, right, for the first part of his tenure as a New York Met, and he kind of just fell downhill from there. If you were part of all of our pre-games and post-games, I told you all, listen, I understand what he did for the New York Mets. When he came over, I appreciate that. But a guy that throws 89, 90, he throws meatballs, that's going to get hit in the postseason. And lo and behold, it did. And so I gave him a C-. Danny Young, do we really need to talk about the guy? Obviously, it was going to be a hard step up for anybody to try to replace Brooks Raley's production after that early season injury. It's unfortunate. He didn't impress me. and he was just kind of there, to be honest, the whole season, right? Him and Alex Young were just kind of there. So wasn't really impressed. Reed Garrett, that's my guy, Rob. I never fell off the Reed Garrett train, and I almost feel ashamed of myself for giving him the A- right now that I see that you have the A, because this guy came out of the gates swinging for the New York Mets, especially when they needed him the most. Edwin Diaz goes down. They try to put him in the highest leverage situation possible as a closer in bulk innings, and naturally he gets tired, right? He doesn't look like himself. And everybody's off the Reed Garrett bandwagon. Everyone's like, listen, this guy was a one-hit wonder. What is he doing? Get him out of here. Well, not so fast. As the season progresses, the bullpen gets their help. Ryan Stanek comes in. Edwin Diaz gets back to form. Reed Garrett goes back to that 6th or 7th inning type role, more so the 7th inning, right? Because they started to trust in him more and more. And you saw the reason why he was having success early in the season. The splitter's nasty, and he throws 99. I think he hit the 100 on the gun a couple times as well. He's a flamethrower, and that's what I want out of our bullpen. That's why I like Ryan Stanek. That's why I like Reed Garrett. That's why I like Edwin Diaz, because those guys throw gas. Gas. Same thing with Daniel Nunez, who unfortunately we don't have the pleasure of grading because he wasn't on that final roster to end the season, but I would have given him a very high grade as well, because Daniel Nunez is special, and a lot of people should not forget about him for this bullpen moving forward next year. Jose Butto, I'm a big Jose Butto guy, and I love the way that he filled in for both the rotation and the bullpen this season. And obviously, I think that, everybody was kind of clamoring for him to be that starter when the starting pitching kind of in the first couple of months, like you said, was faltering. Everyone's like, bring Jose Butto back up. I know I was in that camp, and he did a phenomenal job. And I think that he really adjusted well in terms of flip-flopping back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen. And obviously the Mets needed him more so in the bullpen to end the season. He kind of faltered a little bit. The walks were an issue. I know he posted, I want to say his ERA in the season. I don't have it right in front of me. I'm not sure if you have any notes, but it was somewhere floating around 2.50, somewhere a little bit north of that, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, it doesn't quite matter. I think that with him fizzling out, starting in that month of September or late August, whenever it was enough to bump him down to a C for myself personally. And I think that he just did the job well enough. And I think that he also is going to be a staple next season for this team, whether it's a 6-man type in the rotation, right, depending on what the Mets do in the offseason for the pitching category, or whether being slotted back into that bullpen. And that's kind of where I wish, Jeremy Hefner came in and realized where he was faltering and maybe kind of mitigated that. And I know it doesn't all fall on the pitching coach, because that's the easy scapegoat out. Like, these players should know their mechanics through and through. These guys have been doing it. This is their job, right? This is their job. They've been doing it their entire lives. But it's kind of like there's some sort of working relationship there. So that's my grade for Jose Butto. Again, I'm a really big fan of Jose Butto, and I know that he's going to have contributions. I just wish he contributed a little bit more consistently down the stretch of the season. Ryan Stanek, listen, I want this guy back. Even though I gave him a D+, I want him back. I'm not going to lie to you. And I don't think it's going to cost the Mets too much money to bring him back. We all know he's erratic. He's wild. He walks a lot of batters. And the Mets really don't need that with how many walks they gave up this season. But there's something to be said for how nasty of a pitcher he is. There's something to be said for him throwing gas out of the bullpen and him showing flashes of brilliance right before Edwin Diaz to close out the season. I also think he didn't have, they didn't do him enough justice in terms of when he first came on board. It sort of seemed like he needed to win the trust of Carlos Mendoza, which is valid, right? But I think that if he had got put into that sort of setup role sooner, I think maybe he would have had more success for the Mets. Yeah. And so I think that also kind of hindered him a little bit. But again, I can't give him with his production in the regular season, going off the regular season, I can't give him anything more than a D+. Although, again, that grade doesn't change my mind in terms of wanting him back. I think he would be a valuable piece, maybe on another 1-year deal for the New York Mets in 2025. And Edwin Diaz, listen, B+. I'm sorry. I know the numbers weren't 2022-esque. This guy, at the end of the day, is coming off of a blown knee, right? He blew out his knee and missed the entire 2023 season. We didn't even know what to expect out of Edwin Diaz. I was confident that we were going to get a somewhat of a version of 2022, but I was wary that we were going to get that whole version of 2022 of Edwin Diaz. Listen, the adversity that guy had to go through to sort of get himself right in every aspect is very just respectable and commendable for me. I understand that there was points in this season, right, where he looked like he was lost. He looked like he didn't have confidence in himself. I understand that, right? The IL stint didn't help him as well to begin the season. Mm-hmm. But I trust in Edwin Diaz more often than not. And it got to a point in the postseason and down the stretch of September, Rob, where you and I both said there's no not trusting Edwin Diaz. This guy, you're paying him for a reason. He's considered a top whatever closer in the league, right? There's a handful of guys that you can put up there with him. And I know that he was also a little bit erratic with the walks. I get it. He needs to trust his fastball more because the slider, when he doesn't have it, makes him a lot more susceptible to bad things happening. But all things considered, I think he had a decent postseason in my estimation. And I know we're not grading off the postseason, but the regular season alone, with everything that he's had to go through, right? I think it was a more than respectable regular season showing for Edwin Diaz, and therefore he gets the B+. I see you're a little bit tougher on him than I was, but listen, 2025 Edwin Diaz, we're going to see a whole different beast unlocked, and I'm very confident in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when it comes to my Graves, look, Adam Ottavino, look, I wasn't going to give him anything other than an F, right? There was times early in the season when he was actually one of our best relievers very early on, right? But that was basically it, right? Him remaining on the roster basically the entire time was crazy to me. But he don't deserve nothing but an F. So that's done with Ottavino there. When it comes to Maton, I gave him a C only because he was so good when we first got him. Was that if you really look at when we did get him, right? Diaz was just coming back from suspension. There was no Stanek yet. Butto was kind of that, is he going to be a starter? Is he going to be a reliever? The Mets did not know what to do with him. Remember how many times Jose Butto was pitching 2 innings and not pitching for 3 days because they weren't sure if they had to start him? Maton and Reed Garrett were the two guys that were there, most of the time. And, I think Phil Maton, when you get to face better hitters day after day after day, like you do in the playoffs, you're going to get hit with that 89 miles an hour fastball, and your pitchers are very similar with the same speed. I just thought, later in the year, he couldn't have been trusted anymore. And I think that led to the Mets kind of like that circle of trust, especially when he got to the playoffs, was just very limited. And Maton was part of that problem. So I'm going to give him a sin. Danny Young, a tough go for it because, knowing that we had Brooks Raley was like, oh, that's great. That lefty is perfect. Raley will be fine for us. And then you had to replace a guy like Raley, and that was almost impossible. Danny Young's in a terrible spot. Maybe he'll turn into a good lefty, right? I think you definitely got to give him an opportunity in spring. Obviously we'll see what the Mets do in spring training wise. I haven't really looked at the bullpen free agents as of yet, but Danny Young deserves a chance at spring training to see if he can win one of the jobs in the bullpen, because lefties are always important, at least one in the pen. You saw what happened later in the season. When the Mets were, trying to win games and make the playoffs, they had so many left-handed batters that they had to face, and they were bringing in Reed Garrett, who was good against lefties. But always having that left-hander in the bullpen, I always think matters. And Danny Young it was a tough go of it, and that's why I'm giving him a D. And you're
Tanner Scott, anybody?
Yeah, exactly. Reed Garrett, there's nothing. I had to give him an A. This guy came from nowhere, right? This guy jumped around from team to team to team. Never had any success. He comes to the Mets, figured out that splitter and just took off running. Remember, he was the Swiss Army knife. He came in when the starter wasn't doing well, came in the 4th inning. Hey, we need him in the setup, man. We need him in the setup hole. Diaz suspended, Reed Garrett, you're the closer. He was in so many different scenarios, different options, and he was the quote-unquote lefty specialist for left-handed batters because he was the best guy in the bullpen against left-handers. He was just he did everything. He never complained. And when they said you're going out there, didn't matter if it was for an inning or 2 innings. Whenever it was in the game, he was always available, always not always lights out. But again, nobody's perfect. But he was just so good in any situation. You can find a great moment for Reed Garrett, and that's why he deserves an A. And listen, he'll be back. He will be back. I can guarantee you that. That's how good he was. He deserves to be back with the New York Mets. Jose Butto, I almost gave him a C. I was almost on board with you, Chris. I stuck with a B for a while, and then I was gonna go to C, and I'm like, I'm gonna keep it a B because the Mets kind of misused him early on in the season, right? They threw him out as the starter, right? They limited his innings, and obviously that's what they do with young guys. They're gonna limit the innings, and I didn't think it was worth starting him when you're gonna give a guy 3, 4, maybe 5 innings. And you still got to go to your bullpen that is depleted. When Drew Smith not there, Brooks Raley not there, Foley not there. There was a lot, and Nunez was still there at the time, but most of those guys were already gone. And I was like, you know what? Butto's got to go to the bullpen. He'll be better off with us in the bullpen. At this point, he was. And he was good. He was really good for us. But then when he had to take on the role of Nunez, when Nunez went down, it seemed like Jose Butto completely lost his way, and it never changed throughout the rest of the regular season, especially the end of the season. And, he took it into the postseason, and maybe it was just the innings. Maybe it was just the heavy usage, and his body's not used to it, his arm's not used to it, and he just was fatigued. That's always a possibility. Maybe he'll come back that much stronger next year. But I got to give a B to Jose Butto. Ryan Stanek, yeah, I think we were a tough grader on Stanek because I think we expected even more from him. And I wanted him in the offseason to sign him. I was big on Ryan Stanek. I wanted him in the offseason. They didn't do it. They eventually got him at the deadline. He wasn't good for us when we first got him, right? He was walking a ballpark. He couldn't find the zone. He gave up a couple of home runs early when he first came over to the Mets, but then he settled down, right? You talked about his role. There wasn't a role, right? There wasn't a trust factor there with Mendoza, and he didn't really have a spot to put him. Like you said, Chris, I think if you would have put him in the setup role, he would have probably shined right away. But because they didn't know where to use him, I think it actually hurt him. He thrives off of energy and important moments of the game. And throwing him in the 5th inning, sometimes the 6th inning, the occasional 7th inning. I think the 8th inning was just perfect for him. And when Mendoza finally figured it out, again, another reason why Mendoza gets an A from us, because Mendoza realizes what better suits all his guys. And he finally figured it out with Stanek. And that's why Stanek's going to get a C, because he didn't come out the gates firing with us, but he ended it pretty well. So he's going to get a C. And Edwin Diaz, I'm going to be a tough grader with Edwin Diaz because of the fact that you are paying him $20 million. You are paying him like the one of the best closers, if not the best closer in baseball. So injury or not, we talked about how important he was to this team. And, just because, we didn't believe he should have been suspended, he was suspended. That's on the individual there. He got suspended, right? He gave up a lot of home runs this year. He had double-digit blown saves, right? Those blown saves, even if you cut it in half, say if there was, I think it was 15? If he cuts it in half to 7, that's 7 more wins, we probably win the division. Right, that's the difference of not playing a wild card round and starting in the NLDS, and you never know, possibly could be a whole different story because you only had to play 2 series until the World Series instead of 3. Maybe your pitchers wouldn't have been as fatigued. A lot of that plays a role. And with Edwin Diaz, I think he, was I expecting him to be 2022 great? No. Because of that injury, I wasn't. But when I see that knee was healthy, there was no excuses after that. And I think he underperformed from what I was expecting. I wasn't expecting greatness, but I was expecting above average. And I think he was a tick below that. And I think it cost the Mets a decent amount of games where we might not have been talking about a wild card. We could have been talking about a division or at least a top wild card spot that could have made all the difference in the world as well. So my grade with Edwin Diaz is a C. It's tough, but he's a $20 million man. He's paid the best closer in baseball, and he didn't perform like it, and it hurt the Mets throughout the season, Chris. So, and listen, we're giving grades to the bullpen here, but look at the losses we had. We had Foley, Smith, Rayleigh, Nunez. Those are four, at least three of the four, but four guys that probably would have been on in if they were healthy in this bullpen throughout the season and probably in the playoffs. You wouldn't have seen Ottavino. You wouldn't have had Danny Young. Maton might have not even been here as early as he was. He might have came later in the deadline. He might have not been here at all. Just think of the bullpen if you would have had Stanek, Buto, Diaz, Garrett, and then the guys I mentioned. That would have been a hell of a lot better bullpen, and maybe things would have changed. But there was a lot of guys injured in this bullpen, and these guys did their best, but it wasn't good enough. So that's our grades for the bullpen for the 2024 season. And now we're going to finish up the pitching with the starting rotation. And again, guys, Kodai Senga is not on this list because he didn't really make or break the season for us, even though he pitched more innings in the playoffs than he did during the season. So, it's stupid to give him a grade because it's just not fair to him, and it's kind of a waste of time. So, Chris, starting rotation, your grades for 2024.
I mean, I didn't know we were doing A pluses, or else I would have given Manaea an A plus. So Manaea definitely gets an A for obvious reasons, man. I mean, to make that's a drastic adjustment to make, mid-season. That's a drastic adjustment to make, to throw and change your arm angle, change the point of attack in which you throw the ball to home plate, right? Almost falling off the mound. That is a drastic adjustment. And the fact that he was able to do that and find immense success with that, because before he made that, like, he was doing okay, but we really thought that Luis Severino was going to be the quote unquote ace of the Mets rotation with Senga down, right? And that was before the Manaea adjustment. And obviously that was still very early on to the season, right? With a short sample size. But again, to do that is just speaks volumes. And we talked about the pitching lab that he went to in the offseason to get more velocity on his fastball, right? But he also made an adjustment with the way that he utilizes his fastball and not the four seam. I'm not talking about the four seam because everyone was talking about the velocity with his four seam, but nobody was talking about his sinker. And that's something he found out and was able to utilize mid-season in a different manner. And they were talking about that in the postseason too, in terms of most guys that throw sinkers that tail away from right-handed bats, they throw it down. They want to keep it as down as possible. But Sean Manaea, finding success with it up in the zone, that's unique within itself. So Sean Manaea gets an A, 100%. Luis Severino, again, right? We'll see, and we're not going to talk about in terms of like who's going to be retained versus who's not. I think that, whether we discuss that ourselves right on a stream, Rob, I'm down to do that sometime next week because that's going to be important with the plethora of arbitration guys and free agents that the Mets have. But Luis Severino came in here as a complete wild card, right? Yankees fans, if anybody cares what they talk about or what they say, they were clowning the Mets for signing him. Oh, look at the, north of 6 ERA last season. He's horrible. He's not the 2017, 2018 version of, Luis Severino that you saw be an all-star in back-to-back seasons. He's not that. I think he had a pretty respectable season. Yes, it did look like he got fatigued earlier than Sean Manaea did, given the bulk innings. He also pitched, and I didn't even do the math on this and how many innings he pitched more than last season, but quite a bit, right? Quite a bit. He hadn't thrown this many innings in, 4 or 5 years, somewhere around there. So I think he was very impressive given that. I like the fastball sweeper combination. We know he's a fireballer. We know he's 97, 98, can even pump it up to 99, and the sweeper is a good look. I think he made, at the middle part of the season, right, you start to see him fizzle off. People were concerned about his velocity. That really wasn't the concern. I think his velocity was down for like 1 or 2 starts, and then it shot right back up. The concern for me about Luis Severino, right, is he able to stay healthy? And he proved that he was able to this season. So I'm kind of curious in terms of what his asking price and the amount of years he's going to ask for. The Mets will be in trouble if he asks for anything 4 and up, right? I think that that's stretching it. But again, the thing that we talked about with Luis Severino, and especially in a couple of games against the Phillies, right? When he's cruising in these games. You get to the 6th inning and he hits a wall because he keeps on making the same mistake over and over again to the elite hitters, a la Bryce Harper. You keep on throwing the same pitch and not getting the swing and miss. Sweeper, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in a row. Eventually, they're going to catch on and they're going to burn you. So that's something that I definitely think he needs to make an adjustment for next season, whether he's a New York Met or not. But the overall bounce back type of season that he had, I was high on Luis Severino coming into the season, as were you. We talked about it multiple times in this offseason when everybody hated the signing. Oh, he's an ex-Yankee. Oh, he had a 6+ ERA last season, right? David Stearns knows what he's doing. He knows where to take those calculated risks. And he took a risk, not even because it was a 1-year deal for $13 million, but everyone's saying it's an overpay. It was a 1-year deal. And he made Luis Severino prove it. And for the most part, I think that Luis Severino did prove it. Now, again, he's not going to be a 1 or 2 starter in your rotation, maybe not even a 3 starter, right? If I had to ask for my rotation wish list in this offseason, he'd be a starting pitcher 4 for the New York Mets, with a David Peterson being a starting pitcher 5, as well as David Peterson did. But again, he did just enough, and I think that he was above average, but not quite into that A territory. Yeah. David Peterson gets an A, man. David Peterson gets an A. I mean, what more could you ask? We were all uncertain about David Peterson, especially coming off of that, hip surgery that he had. Came in midway through the season, didn't know what to expect. We know the lackluster performances in seasons prior. We see that he has the potential. He has the stuff, right? He has the makeup of being a great lefty in this league. But to go out there and really give a jolt to this Mets starting rotation when they needed it the most was so super impactful on the rest of the season and how this starting pitching staff was able to float above water just enough to keep the offense in it when the offense had their dry spells. And that is all thanks to David Peterson and Sean Manaea in my mind. And that's why they're the only 2 starters that get the A's for both of our lists, right? Listen, listen, this is crazy to me. And honestly, before we get to Tyler McGill, I kind of want to talk about this because if you all know anything about Rob and I and our content on this channel, Rob is the Quintana guy. I was never the Quintana guy. Never. I went time after time after time, especially after his rough patch in the beginning of the season. I said, get this guy out of here. And even when he started to do well again, right? Even in September, when he held it down and could have arguably been the Mets' best pitcher in September, I still didn't trust in the guy. I didn't. And that's because of the same reason why I didn't trust in Phil Maton. Usually, soft tossers in this league are going to have a harder time finding success, right? That's just the name of the game. You got to be perfect in your location. And it seemed at times that Jose Quintana wasn't. But I had to give him a B+, man. I had to give him a B+. He exceeded my expectations coming into this season. What he did in September alone for the New York Mets was just absolutely impressive. And this isn't even taking into consideration the postseason start that he had in Milwaukee in Game 3 when the Mets desperately needed him to come through. This is just how he held up in the regular season. Outside of a really, really rough patch, and I will say it was really rough to the point where almost every Mets fan wanted him off the team, maybe minus you, Rob. He bounced back in a perfect way and he held it down, man. He held it down. So you know what? I got to give Jose Quintana the B+. And before we get to Tyler McGill, I want to get your thoughts and opinions in terms of what dictated your grade to give Quintana the C, because again, this is surprising to me. You were being really tough on Jose Quintana in this postseason recap grade here.
Yeah, so when I go hard on a player, when I always am behind him throughout the season, I want to be that tough grader because there was moments in this season, even I doubted Jose Quintana, especially early. He was a huge problem for us for for like a good first half of the year. And again, if we had the Quintana of September in April or even May, maybe those wins matter at the end. And I always go back to that because everybody talks about, oh, April and May wins don't matter. Yes, it did, because the Mets took until game 161 to make the playoffs. So those games matter. So because Jose Quintana, I always had his back. I wanted to be a little bit more of a tough grader because he was downright almost off this team. And even I had to question him as bad as he was. And that's why I gave him a C, Chris. I think that was the reason why, because the first half just didn't do it for me. Like, he was literally almost out of this rotation for anybody at this, but Christian Scott. Remember, we were talking about that at that point. So I just felt like he just wasn't good enough in the first half. As much as I wanted him to be good, if he was, I'm not saying September Quintana, but even if he was August, where he was, good in April and May, it could have went the long way for the Mets, not trying to fight back for almost the entire year just to get into the playoffs.
Yeah. And again, you're spot on with that, because at one point, I'm not going to even lie to you, I was on the trade Quintana block at the deadline. I said, get rid of this guy, right? And it's a damn good thing they didn't listen to my dumbass, because guess what? Christian Scott ended up getting hurt, and we were having the Christian Scott versus Jose Quintana debate.
Yeah.
And they would have been in some deep waters, right? If they had done exactly what I was advocating for. And you know what? Like, I'm not going to go back and say that, I should have trusted him more. I had my valid reasons, and I still think that they're valid reasons for not trusting him. But I think him continuously going out there and proving me wrong, I had to give him the benefit of the doubt, and that's why I gave him a pretty decent score. Maybe the plus was a little bit too much. Maybe I should have shot it down to a B, but I couldn't see myself giving him anything more than, or anything less than, a B at the very minimum. But I agree. But moving on, Tylor Megill, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. He's not impressive. He wasn't impressive. He had flashes of, brilliance this season. And this is the thing that always irks me, about Tylor Megill, is that you look at the Savant page, you look at some of the advanced analytics, on paper, he should be a better pitcher than what he's producing. But the lack of command at times, it's always like you're on edge watching Tylor Megill pitch. And that's the same thing before this season that we were saying about David Peterson. But he figured it out. And guess what? Tylor Megill didn't. And I don't know what the future holds for Tylor Megill. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm pretty sure he will be a New York Met, next season. If I had to I'm not going to even go there. Anyways, I'm pretty sure he's going to be a Met next season. He was unimpressive. He had brilliance. Obviously, the Mets tried to use him in a hybrid kind of role out of the bullpen. Didn't quite work out. And they tried that as well in seasons past. And he just isn't really like a bullpen type of pitcher. Yeah. But then again, is he even really a starting pitcher either? Because he just can't get you deep into a ball game. So what is Tylor Megill? And for that alone, right, I think I was being a little bit generous on this grade, giving him a C-. He doesn't cut it, man. He doesn't cut it. And, I want the Mets to get to a position. Obviously, the story was different opening up this season, but next season, this guy can't even be anywhere close to being an option for you in the rotation. Not even a starting pitcher 6. Like, this guy cannot be a consistent contributor, right? Or at least try to be, if you're going to be a championship caliber team. It's a punt game essentially with him on the mound. So very unimpressed with Tylor Megill.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Yeah, I see. I actually like your grades. To be probably better than mine. I kind of did a quick job on. I was actually at work when I was doing the pitching grades for the starting rotation. But yeah, I agree with you with Tylor Megill. And I'll get to him in just a little bit. Showman, I had to put that plus in there because he was, with Severino still pitching well, but he still didn't get to that ace level, right? We needed that so badly. And Manaea figured out a way to be that guy. Now, I'm not saying that he was, just, top line ace, but he was really damn good. And when he figured it out, changed his mechanics around, basically took Sale's approach and did it. And to do it with the in season is not easy to do. You have guys, pitchers that can't even fix their mechanics in season and in game. He did it in the season. That's amazing within itself. You know, this wasn't after the All-Star, during the All-Star break, he went to change it up. No, this was during the season. Basically, between starts, he figured something out like that. And that's amazing. That's why he gets an A+. And I'd love to have Sean Manaea back. Hopefully, you know, we know he's going to opt out. Hopefully, the Mets do what they need to do to retain him. Again, not as a number 1, but I can definitely see him as a number 3 or 4. Definitely. Because, you know, the league gets around and they've seen him with this mechanics. Who knows if he's going to be as good as he was this year. So A+, because obviously what he did to turn the season around and help the Mets do what they did, he was a big part of that. Luis Severino, I stuck with a B. I was very close to giving him a C+ or a C-. I kept the B because he was very good for us, right? We always were on board after we signed him. We did the live stream when we signed him that we thought this was a good signing. A lot of people hated it. Yankee fans laughed. It was a great move for the New York Mets. You got a $13 million pitcher pitching like somebody who was getting close to $20 million a year. That's basically what he did for us for the majority of the year. Yeah, he ran out of gas, but he hasn't pitched this many innings since, 2018? So you expect that to be the case. It just happened that it happened at the worst time for us, right? You know, if this was a team that wasn't making the playoffs, maybe you can say, all right, he had a great year. You can't really worry about it. But when you're in the playoffs, you hope these guys have that next burst of energy. They just didn't have it after throwing so many pitches. So I give a B to Severino. David Peterson, nothing else to say. After his hip surgery, he talked about it. He can fully rotate his hips when he throws the ball now. He said that every time he threw the ball prior to his surgery, he felt pain. So just imagine trying to be a starting pitcher in Major League Baseball, throwing 80 to 90 pitches every 5th day and feeling pain every one of those pitches. Not easy to do that. And then you have to execute at the same time and be good. So with David Peterson, and the hip was the issue, this is the guy that I have no problem being one of the 5 guys in our rotation next year, right? A lot of these options and that we've seen in this rotation this year could be possibilities next year. That is one less guy you have to sign in the rotation. That you don't have to really worry about. And that's a good sign because we were talking in the beginning of the year, damn, we're going to have Kodai Senga in this rotation and that's it. That was the talk in the beginning of the year after, with free agency. So we would have to sign a couple of guys. Now, maybe we have to sign one big guy. Maybe we'll sign one big guy and maybe a middle of the rotation guy, but we don't have to go out and sign 3 or 4, which is, I think, huge for David Stearns and the New York Mets. So David Peterson is a big proponent of that and help us out probably next year, but what a great job by Peterson this year. And that's leaving out the postseason with David Peterson and what he did for us in the postseason. We talked about Jose Quintana, so I'm going to skip over that. Tyler McGill with a D. He has such good stuff. It is frustrating watching him. That's the problem. He has a high velocity fastball. He has 3 other pitches. He just can't harness all of it and figure it out, right? If he would just figure out a little bit, he could be in number 5. I do think I agree with you, Chris. He'll be on this team next year. He might be, an option, 6, 7, 8 option, depending on if there's injuries like there were this year.
AAA depth. There's AAA depth.
Yeah. He's not going to be in his bullpen. Obviously, they tried that, been there, done that 2 years out of the last 3. It just doesn't work. And he's just not a guy who can trust in the rotation every 5th day. So I give a D to Tyler McGill. So that's our rotation. And now we're going to get to the fun stuff, right? Chris, you want to do outfield next?
Yeah, let's do outfield.
All right, we're going to do outfield. We'll keep
You started off this time. Giving me all the hard assignments going first.
All right. So we're going to go with the outfield now. Obviously, there's a couple of more guys. All right. So the grades for our outfield of the New York Mets. Brandon Nimmo. Man, was he disappointed. I was guy that was always hard on Brandon Nimmo. He surprised the hell out of me of what he did the last couple of seasons, right? I don't think you should give a massive contract for a guy who had a really, really good year and a half and other years had injury problems, and he had more injury problems this year. He just right. He was one of our better guys for a little while, and then he just fell off the mat after the All-Star break. I mean, if the Mets didn't make the playoffs, you can turn to Brandon Nimmo and saying he was one of the problems. He was definitely one of the problems, and I give him a D. Here we go. We paid him to be a center fielder. Now he's a left fielder, and he still got hurt this year. So year and a half out of what, 7? Out of all those years, he still is hurt during the season. He's not the same Brandon Nimmo that we love taking the walks. He was that early in the year, but after that, he became a complete home run guy, a high strikeout guy, less walks. His defense wasn't as good as I thought he would be in left field. That took a little bit of a downer there as well. I think he deserved a D. I think if Brandon Nimmo was what we had of Brandon Nimmo in 2023 or even 2022, who knows where this team would be? They would be that much better, but he wasn't. And he was actually a huge disappointment this year. And it's frustrating because I thought Brandon Nimmo in left field was going to be, he can be Gold Glove caliber in left field. And the bat also, oh man, it was just frustrating. I mean, for a guy who is an on-base guy, and then he used power and strikeouts as the way to go again, is a huge turnoff to me when it comes to Brandon Nimmo. I think he needs to go back to his ways. Brandon Nimmo, you are a 2-hitter. You're not an RBI guy, right? He had 70 RBIs at like the All-Star break, and he ended up with what, 82, 83? Like he didn't.
I think he got 90. I think he got 90.
He had 20 RBIs basically in the second half. From starting from what, 65, 70 prior to the All-Star break or around the All-Star break. That is a huge disappointment. We were talking about him having 100 RBIs. That's how good he was early. And to drop off that drastically, he changed his game. Because when he was still being an RBI guy, he was still walking. He was limited in his strikeouts. His average was up. I mean, he was what? He ended like a 220 hitter? Like, that's terrible. That's not the Brandon Nimmo. I want the number 2 Brandon Nimmo. I want the leadoff. I mean, he can't be the leadoff hitter anymore, but I want him to be that number 2 hitter, the guy who takes pitches, let Lindor steal bases, the guy to get on base, slap the ball the other way, pull the ball to the right side, try to get it through the hole to get the guy first to third, stuff like that. That's the Brandon Nimmo I want to see. That is the best type of Brandon Nimmo. And I think that's why I'm giving him a D. Starling Marte, I give him an A-, man. I mean, for Starling Marte, he's just a pure hitter. We've seen it late in the year. He struggled. Obviously, he was out for that, 6 weeks or so with that leg injury of the bone bruise. That was a huge hole for our Mets, right? But it also picked up Tyrone Taylor that we're going to get to as well. The Starling Marte basically put a light on Tyrone Taylor. Starling Marte, what a great job by him. Up there in age, we weren't really thinking much of Starling Marte this year. We don't. If you can get anything from him, it would be a positive. We got a lot more than that. You see what he did at the end of the year. He's an RBI machine. When he's healthy, the guy hits. Scares the hell out of me in right field, and that's why I probably didn't give him a full A. But he shocked me. I didn't think he was going to be this good this year, and he was. And we saw what he did taking that into the playoffs as well. So A- for Starling Marte. Harrison Bader. He was the one guy that was doing everything earlier in the season. He was getting the clutch hits. He was probably our hottest bat. He was our best glove in center field. And then around, similar to Nimmo, around the All-Star break, couldn't hit at all. Basically lost his starting job to Tyrone Taylor. And that was the end of Harrison Bader. Barely got any starts in the postseason. That told you everything. And that was really disappointing because if Harrison Bader, I think if he was looking good in the regular season, he was the guy I wanted starting in the postseason if he looked something like himself earlier in the year. But you couldn't do it, right? He's a clutch performer. We've seen it with the Yankees in the postseason. but you couldn't put that opportunity out there for him because he didn't deserve it. And he never got to see it because he was just having a rough patch from the second half into the postseason. Tyrone Taylor, I gave an A, right? A guy who was our fourth outfielder, right? We got him in that trade with Milwaukee. He was an afterthought, right? I thought it was a solid player. He could play all three outfield positions. He did it. He does have power. That's what we thought in the beginning of the year. But he became our starter, basically, our starting center fielder. And he took the job from Harrison Bader. And it didn't start with Harrison Bader. It started with the Marte injury. And then it just creeped into the play of Bader because Tyrone Taylor was so good. Can't say anything better about Tyrone Taylor. He was the guy I wanted up late in the season. He got them big hits. He did it in the postseason as well. Great job by Tyrone Taylor. And we got him. We have him again. And that's a great sign as well. If he's going to be out center fielder, maybe depending on what the acquisitions are in offseason, I rather have Tyrone Taylor as our fourth outfielder. I think it suits him better there. And that's why I gave Taylor an A. Jesse Winker. What is there to say about Jesse Winker? Right? He's a badass. He struggled trying to do too much early on when we first got him. He was an on-base machine, a guy who has pop. Didn't show none of that early on with the Mets, but then he turned it on, figured it out. Was the heart and soul of this team throughout the rest of the season into the postseason. Jesse Winker with a B. And, Stearns talked about Jesse Winker. He was basically, the heart. He brought the fire. And Stearns is going to keep in contact with him, which is good. Because I would love to have Jesse Winker as our other possible, maybe even just our DH, but he can also play the outfield as well, Chris. So those are my grades for the outfield.
Yeah, I'll go in reverse order because we were just talking about Jesse Winker. If you guys pay attention to my video again, if you're just watching or tuning into this, please hit the thumbs up as usual on both streams. Myself and Rob's vote in the live chat polls, all that fun stuff. We just got into it today, man. No, not even any shameless plugging. Spam those thumbs up for us. We definitely appreciate it. Listen, I talked about Jesse Winker. You'll hear it. I'll give you the postseason stats on the video at 8 p.m. and I'll give it to you right now, right? Because I know we're not talking about postseason, and I'm not going to lie. I kind of took into consideration the postseason for Jesse Winker, and I knew I shouldn't have. But listen, the guy alongside Mark Vientos, right, and maybe Pete Alonso as well, we'll talk about that in just a second, is that Jesse Winker is one of the best Mets hitters in the postseason. He had over an 1,100 OPS in 10 games in the postseason. His on-base percentage was .531 in the postseason. That is getting it done when your team needs you the most, right? And he had a very lackluster regular season. So honestly, I was probably a little bit generous for, Jesse Winker because, we're talking about a guy in September that went 3 for 42. We're talking about a guy that, we don't know what his contributions are going to be in the postseason, right? We brought him in here for a reason, and he's not performing, especially at the plate. So why do we bring him in here for, right? But the Mets brought him in because he's a veteran. He knows how to take disciplined at-bats, a disciplined approach, and we saw in the postseason. And the fire that David Stearns said in the press conference that he brought, right? That is something that's integral. It always seemed like it was destined that Jesse Winker was going to be a Met when he was way back when he was a Cincinnati Red. It almost seemed like it because he was trying to take on that villain role. But at the end of the day, he was a nice guy. Let's not get it twisted here. But he seems like a guy that actually enjoys playing in New York, right? And he embraced the New York Mets organization. And that's really all that we can ask for. We said the same thing about Adam Ottavino in the offseason, right? Whether we wanted him here or not, the fact that he wanted to be a New York Met at least says something because there's a lot of players in this league that'll go and choose, LA, or they'll choose a smaller market team because they can't handle the bright lights of New York. They can't handle the pressure that comes with the New York Mets organization and how they're viewed around the league because Steve Cohen's the owner, right? And so for that reason, screw it. If you don't want to be here, we don't want you. Jesse Winker wants to be here, and hopefully the New York Mets want him because those types of players come few and far between. I'm not going to lie to you. So, I hope he comes back. I don't foresee him. I could see him being a platoon DH And I think that's also what hindered him. I'm not going to lie to you, in the regular season when he platooned with JD Martinez ever since coming over, because he got off to a decent start as a Met and he kind of just fizzled out from there. And in September, he had a really rough go at it. But again, with the aura surrounding Jesse Winker, the energy, the vibes, he had a walk-off home run at one point. Celebrations were immaculate. I mean, the guy was kind of like a glue piece in terms of the overall mentality and vibe of the New York Mets. And for that, I give him the B+. Tyrone Taylor, listen, I'm a Tyrone Taylor guy, man. I'm a Tyrone Taylor guy. I made a standalone video, a player spotlight video about Tyrone Taylor, and I told you all how great he's been for the New York Mets in terms of filling in as a spot starter. He was never supposed to be a starter for this team. Like you said, Rob, he was supposed to be a fourth outfielder. And then Harrison Bader, right, after the first couple months of the season, fell off a damn cliff. He fell off a damn cliff. Bader mania was no more. And then Tyrone Taylor took that spot and he ran with it. And you look at the splits, it was like an elevator effect or an escalator effect, because he just kept on going and he got better as the season progressed and his split numbers. So yeah, I like Tyrone Taylor a lot. Obviously, he's 30 years old, still in arbitration. It was a steal of a deal at the time when, David Stearns pulled the trigger in that Hauser and Tyrone Taylor trade to acquire those two guys. And I know for you, right, you were talking about Tyrone Taylor always being that main piece of the trade, and everybody was forgetting that. Yep. So, maybe I was a little bit, disingenuous. I don't know what you want to say. I gave him the B-. He could have worked his way up to a B, but I will say though, for me, we can't have Tyrone Taylor starting every day in 2025. As good as he was, I know he's versatile. He's a bench bat, right? He's a bench bat, and the statistics still prove that. As good as he was as a replacement mid-season, he almost gave me like a Mark Canha vibe from 2022, where
that's a good call.
He's not like a starter, but he's somehow been entrusted by default to be a starter, and that could be a little bit of a weaker link on your team, although he ended up being, right down the stretch of the season, better than Brandon Nimmo, who I'll talk about here in just a second. But again, a guy that you don't expect to start on your team if it considers itself a championship caliber team. He's more of a bench bat. But I love Tyrone Taylor. The guy's solid. He plays a great center field, right field, whatever you entrust him in. And that versatility went a long way in this season. A long way. Harrison Bader, I'm going to keep it short and sweet and to the point. He had everybody tricked in the first couple of months of the season. He didn't have me fooled. If you look at the trend of Harrison Bader's career, from his St. Louis days all the way through, this season as a New York Met, the offensive numbers were just down, right? It was the escalator effect, but in the opposite way of what Tyrone Taylor did this season, right? It gets worse and worse. And yeah, he had a pretty decent first couple of months. He produced the long ball. Obviously, the defense you're never going to worry about with Harrison Bader. But again, it was a 1-year, $10 million deal. I didn't like it back then. I can still probably stand on business and say that I didn't like it even now, even recapping this season, because I don't think he really brought that many meaningful contributions to this team. And taking a look at Tyrone Taylor and not really taking a step down in terms of the defensive category when you go from Bader to Taylor is something that just decreases Harrison Bader's value immensely. So was not a big fan of Harrison Bader. And obviously, I don't think that anybody foreshadows him being on this team next season. But again, we'll save that talk for later. And we'll talk about all these pending free agents. So Starling Marte, listen, Starling Marte is like an anomaly for me to try to figure out in terms of grading him, because he's one of the guys that you feel like if he's going well for the New York Mets, the lineup around him is probably going well. But for me, obviously, we all know he's getting older, right? We know that, he has trouble staying on the field. And that's something that your biggest asset as a player, as a ball player in any sport, is your availability, right? That's your biggest asset that you can have. And so it's unfortunate with how many injuries he's had to deal with over the last couple of seasons, but he did have flashes of brilliance for this team, right? He did. And that's why I gave him the B minus, because he did perform above expectations at certain parts of the season. I think when he came back, right, he got off to a little bit of a slow start, but that was really a jolt for this offense to get going. And I do credit Starling Marte for that. And again, you know, I know the Mets were kind of desperate to find a 5-hole hitter to hit behind Pete Alonso. They tried it with JD Martinez, who we'll talk about here in just a second. That wasn't getting the job done. And Starling Marte kind of fit that mold for this season. But going forward, you know, whether Starling Marte is a New York Met next year, and if he survives any trades this offseason or not, right? You know, he's not a 5-hole hitter. At your best lineup for me, I think Starling Marte is a 6 or 7 type guy. I really do. And they need to try to find a different production value than Starling Marte there. Listen, he posted average numbers, right? I mean, 269 batting average, 710 OPS, or was it 715? I think it was 715. It's average numbers, right? But I think the effect that he had on the team when he came back and when he's in the lineup versus without, I think just his presence made me go a little bit above and beyond for his grade. So I give him the B minus. And listen, Brandon Nimmo, I have to say this. We as content creators, or we as fans, right? Because we're fans at the end of the day. We're just fans with mics up here talking to you all. You know, we can't speculate the types of injuries that a player is dealing with, because not everything gets reported to the media. And, you know, as long as they're out there playing, we're going to assume that maybe they're not 100%, but they're good enough to play, right? The medical training staff cleared them, and that's that. You know, I don't know how long in this season, I'm not sure if it's been reported that he was playing with the plantar fasciitis, which obviously hobbled him quite a bit in the postseason. Obviously, in Washington, he had that weird, you know, blackout occurrence where he hit his head on his hotel room table, I think it was, that was reported, that sidelined him for a game or two, and he didn't quite look right after that. But again, you don't really know what goes on behind closed doors, you know, in those situations in terms of them getting back on the field. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to lie to you. He was actually really good in terms of the high leverage situations and with runners on, which is what contributed to his 90 RBIs. But I'm not going to lie to you. Outside of one good month where he kind of carried the Mets, outside of that, this was an abysmal season for Brandon Nimmo. It was abysmal. 224 hitter. You know, his batting or his on-base percentage is usually floating between 360 to 370. That's what you can usually expect from Brandon Nimmo. You know, that dipped to 329, which is league average still. But again, league average in the OBP category for Brandon Nimmo is not what you pay for when you give him an 8-year deal worth $200 million. That's not what you pay for, right? So that was disappointing. Obviously, he turned into 23 home runs, which I kind of like about his game. And, you know, I think I agree with you in that I was really confident and I was screaming at the top of my lungs for Brandon Nimmo to be inserted into that middle of the lineup and have Francisco Lindor prosper at the leadoff spot. Obviously, the trade-off worked because Francisco Lindor took off for an MVP caliber season, and Brandon Nimmo did not. It was that kind of trade-off. It's really a miracle when you look at the middle, you know, of the order guys and how bad of seasons they had in the regular season. To see where the Mets got at the end, it's kind of a miracle, because I'm not going to lie to you. If you take away that one good month from Brandon Nimmo, look at the splits month by month. Everyone, I encourage you, go to Baseball Reference, go look at the splits. They are not good outside of that 1 month. And that's what really kept me from giving him, I'm not going to lie, kind of an F, because this was a really, really bad season from Brandon Nimmo. This is coming from a fan of Brandon Nimmo. I think he's going to have a bounce back year next year. I expect nothing less, because I think he's a warrior and I think he's a tremendously talented ball player. I really do. And I'm expecting really big things. Maybe he makes some tweaks and adjustments in, his game and his approach. Maybe to what you said, I would still like him to hit 15, 16, 17 home runs, but he doesn't need to be up to 20, 21, 22. If that means he's going to get on base more. I think it's going to be a struggle to sort of see where the Mets fit him in the lineup and for Mendoza to figure that out. Obviously, the middle of the order might not be his calling. I think the 2 spot, you're going to see Mark Vientos in that 2 spot a lot next year, and you're not going to relinquish that leadoff spot to Francisco Lindor. So Mendoza is going to have to figure that out, and Brandon Nimmo is going to have to figure something out. A really lackluster season. I know he was probably playing injured more often than not this season, but I can't give him anything more than a D-. And I think, given his expectations coming into the season, what the expectations we had for him coming into the season, a D or a D- might even be generous for him. And this is not me trying to rag on the guy. This guy's going to step it up next season. I have no doubt about it. I simply think he's going to. It's kind of hard to not step up from 224, right? For Brandon Nimmo. It's kind of hard not to do that. So I was just really unimpressed with what he had to offer this season, and I'm expecting that to change. I don't expect him to move back to center field. I think the Mets are going to have to try everything in their power to plug and play and find a replacement, or maybe worst case scenario, you stick with Tyrone Taylor in center field to open up the season. I don't know what happens there, but again, we're going to need bigger contributions next season, especially in the regular season from Brandon Nimmo.
Yeah, absolutely. With Brandon Nimmo, because Vientos looks like he's going to be put in that number 2 spot. It depends on acquisitions as well. We don't know what the offseason is going to look like. Like if you get, let's just say Juan Soto, I wonder what you do, because Juan Soto's like, he seems like he's going to be that perfect number 2 guy, and then you might move Vientos to number 3, but there's no spot for Nimmo then. Like, say if you do keep Pete Alonso, right? Where do you put him? I just thought when you were thinking about the lineup, like, maybe they'll throw him as the number 9 hitter, like a duo leadoff with Lindor. Nimmo 9 leadoff Lindor. That might not be a bad idea. But because I think we got to stop trying to put Nimmo what he's not. And I think they try to do that this year, and they kind of like hyped him up the year before that with the organization, trying to make him hit more home runs, be more of a power hitter, and trying to be more of that RBI guy. Yeah, he could do that, and he did it for 1 year, and then it just made him. Everybody just thought he can be that guy. He's not a run producer. He's not a big run producer. The best Brandon Nimmo is getting on base, hitting the balls in the gap, and getting on base for the guys that are actually run producers. I think that's the key for Brandon Nimmo. That's the best Brandon Nimmo. And trying to mess around with him back and forth, I think, ultimately hurt him. When you have, again, we just talked about it, when you have close to 70 RBIs, but he All-Star break, and you end up barely having over 90 or around 90, you should have easily had over 100 RBIs this year. That's how bad you were. And I think that's a huge problem with Brandon Nimmo. I just think that you can't have 5 months of a bad season and, put this guy in the middle of the lineup and act like there's nothing going, like, oh, he's going to be that guy. The best Brandon Nimmo is a guy who gets on base and a guy who's got the gap and uses speed to, hustle out a double. That's the type of Brandon Nimmo I want to see. So, that's how outfield grades. I wish they would, they're actually not bad considering.
One thing for me, just to sort of also give Brandon Nimmo some credit, and yes, he had a pretty bad season, and our grades reflect that. But I will say, in a season where the runners in scoring position, metric, and situation made us want to rip our hair out, Brandon Nimmo with runners in scoring position hit 319. With 2 outs and runners in scoring position, he hit 283. In high leverage situations in the ball game, as per Baseball Reference, he hit 296. So he was pretty solid in those situations where there was a big at bat or where there was, ducks on the pond and runners in scoring position. That's where I'll give Brandon Nimmo credit. Everything else was pretty bad.
Well, yeah, that was the big reason why you wanted him in the 3-hole when they were trying to make them lineup changes. So yeah, again, he I don't know if he can remain that big RBI or that RBI guy. I don't know if he could in the long run. I don't know. I really don't know. Like, one season doesn't make him a run producer, right? He's not Lindor. He is not Alonso. right? That's the guys that's supposed to be your run producers. But we'll see. Mendoza got work to do with that lineup and see where he put Nimmo. So that's our grades for the outfield, and we're going to the final two guys. Final one, the infield. Right, we have two different slides. There's obviously a good amount of infielders, and we're going to go through it right now. So, Chris, I'm going to make you take it away for the first part of the infielder grades. Here you go.
All right. I don't think again, I wasn't aware of the programming here. I wasn't aware we were giving A pluses. If I had known that, I would have definitely given Manaea an A plus. I would have given Mendoza an A plus. I would have given Francisco Lindor an A plus, and I would have given Mark Vientos an A plus. I'm not gonna lie to you. Yes, Mark Vientos too. I would have given him an A damn plus because that guy's a star, or he's going to be, I should say. But Francisco Lindor, man, listen, what more can you say about Francisco Lindor, man? This guy's the leader. He's an MVP. He should be an MVP. Don't know how the hell he did not make an all-star team this season. That is egregious. That's really egregious. MLB and the fans dropped the ball on that 100%. I mean, I feel like I think it would just be silly for me to be here trying to over-explain to anybody and everybody that watched even a handful of games, right, this season, that Francisco Lindor deserves an A or an A plus, right? It would be silly. What I will say is, the only thing that I'll say is that what was something that I was really hoping would have changed with Francisco Lindor this season, which continues to be a trend with him, is the slow starts, right?
Yes.
He is a habitually slow starter. Don't know if that's going to change. I hope it changes next season, because if this guy puts a season where he gets hot right out of the gate and maintains the type of play that, he started producing later on in the season, there's no way you can't give him an MVP. There's no way. And the fact that he also wasn't a Gold Glove finalist is an absolute joke for shortstop. That is an absolute joke. So bad. Anywho. So I hope that with him being the leadoff guy to begin with next season, he can finally get off to that hot start in his career that we've been waiting to see. But other than that, no complaints out of me from Francisco Lindor. And if you're still complaining about Francisco Lindor, I probably don't like talking baseball. I'm not gonna lie. I probably wouldn't enjoy talking baseball with you. There's nothing else you can say about Francisco Lindor. He deserves the A. All right. Pete Alonso. Peter Morgan Alonso. I almost forgot his middle name for a second. Listen, this is going to be an interesting story with Pete Alonso. We're going to be talking about it the entire offseason. It was a tale of two tapes for Pete Alonso in the postseason versus the regular season. We were wondering at one point if he was ever going to turn it on. We kept on asking. And at one point, I know both of us just honestly stopped. We didn't stop talking about it, but we stopped having that expectation because we figured he just wasn't going to come around. The fact that he was able to come around in the postseason does him wonders for potentially trying to negotiate that top dollar that he's going to want. Again, we'll talk about that at a later date. We got a lot of time to talk about that. But, Pete Alonso, again, at surface value, or at surface level, he had an average season, as average can get. And for the Pete Alonso standards, for a guy that wants to be one of the highest, if not the highest paid first baseman, average is not going to cut it. 788 OPS, not going to cut it. 240 average, okay, I can live with that. But again, he didn't turn in 40 plus home runs or 45 plus home runs. He turned in 34. The RBIs, this guy could not hit. Conversely to Brandon Nimmo, he could not hit to save. If he needed a hit to save his life with a runner in scoring position, that would be the end for Pete Alonso because he wasn't getting it. I'm so serious. It's a huge problem. And you cannot have a guy, if you're a championship contender, you cannot have a guy like that in the middle of your order continuously giving the opposing team break after break after break with runners in scoring position. You cannot. I don't even want to go and look at the splits in terms of what he was hitting with runners in scoring position or runners in scoring position with two outs. It was that bad. But you know what? At the end of the day, to be fair to him as well, again, with the clutch numbers aside, and that's the biggest gripe that we've had was the clutch numbers with Pete Alonso. He had an average season. The RBIs were down. The batting average was exactly where we expected it to be. It was up from the 220, right, that he hit last season. The home runs were down, but again, it's kind of hard to complain in terms of someone hitting 30 plus home runs for you. But when it's Pete Alonso, right, you're kind of expecting 40 plus. It's going to be so fascinating to see what the Mets do with Pete Alonso. But I will say the postseason that he had was really good. He really came around for the New York Mets at the right time. And again, the season doesn't get extended past the wild card if Pete Alonso doesn't come up to the plate in that 9th inning. It just doesn't happen. So that's my grade for Pete Alonso. Couldn't quite go low enough because I think he was average enough to earn him a grade in the C's, but I gave him the C minus. Do you want to sit here? Do you want me to stop here or keep going down the list as you talk about Pete Alonso?
Oh,
What do you want to do, Rob?
Keep going. I have my own little story. Go ahead.
Okay, got it. Mark Vientos, listen, this guy, with everything that could have possibly hindered him, knocked his confidence, out of the water, being sent down after a walk-off. First of all, not even making the roster out of spring training. Everybody's speculating who's going to be the DH. Okay, it's going to be Mark Vientos. They're not going to pull the trigger on a DH. And boom, out of nowhere, we get JD Martinez, right? Doesn't make the roster. Brett Beatty's playing. Brett Beatty's not looking too great. Gets called up, hits a walk-off, gets sent back down. 2 weeks later, gets called back up. And guess what? He does not miss a beat, and he does not relinquish, right, that starting role. For a young 24-year-old guy, to do that and to not have his confidence waver and to turn in despite not being on the team to begin the season and still turning in 27 home runs. If he was on the team out of spring training, we're talking about a 30-plus home run season for Mark Vientos, ladies and gentlemen. The batting average was respectable. It was around 270. Obviously, he had just an insane run in his first 2 months where it was like 315, 320. And then it slowly started to dip as the pitching, the opposition started to figure him out a little bit. But again, we know what his weakness is. And don't expect it to change. I'm not going to lie to you. He's always going to be a strikeout guy. I said this in spring training. We talked about this. Don't expect the strikeouts to go anywhere. He's going to swing and miss. But he's also going to hit you a lot of home runs. And he's going to hit you a lot of doubles. And he's going to drive in a lot of runners, right? That's who Mark Vientos is. His bat, for me, was never the question. I knew he had the talent level there. The question was his defense. And guess what? He played more than a respectable third base. Yes, he had lapses. Yes, we all know he's slow, right? He's as slow as molasses, really. He really is. He might be the slowest player in the league. I'm not going to lie to you. He has a very slow first step, both in the batter's box, right, and also at third base. But he played a very respectable third base, and I got to tip my cap to him for that because that is what kept him at third base, right? That is what kept him there. And that was the question mark with Mark Vientos. So he gets an A. Would have definitely given him and Lindor A pluses if it were up to me. Jeff McNeil, Jeff McNeil, outside of a pretty decent run that got unfortunately cut short after, the All-Star break, he was abysmal this season. There was nothing, right? This batting champion version of McNeil that everyone likes to say, and cling on to, there was none of that. Look at his splits from April. Look at his splits from May. Look at his splits from June. They're abysmal. Just bad. Yes, he turned it around after the All-Star break, but again, we didn't get to see enough. We just simply didn't get to see enough. And this is a guy that coming into this season, we were already having questions surrounding, given the other personnel that are in this organization coming in via free agency, Jose Iglesias as well, who we'll talk about here in just a second, or the prospects coming up. Was Jeff McNeil going to be on this squad? And I know Jeff McNeil has a certain fan base and he has his fans still. And I get it, man. Like the guy, if he ever figures out how to be a 2022 version of himself again, we take him on the team all day long. But we're starting to figure out that could have been a fluky kind of season for him. Like, are we ever going to see that version of Jeff McNeil again? Again, not really much else to add. It just seems like his bat is just slow. He plays a decent second base. It's not going to wow you. You much rather see a tandem of Lindor and Iglesias up the middle for defensive purposes. And again, he doesn't really play. I know he's versatile and he can play the outfield, but he also doesn't play the outfield well either. So it's kind of like a liability in my eyes. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm very curious to see what happens with Jeff McNeil. Was this his final season as a Met, or is he somehow going to survive and make it to 2025? And Jose Iglesias gets the A- for me. I know he kind of disappeared in the postseason. He was abysmal in the postseason. But the spark that he gave the Mets, being a veteran journeyman, wasn't even in the league last year. He was playing in the San Diego Padres minor league organization. Like he was in the minor league farm system for them. He didn't have major league at bats all the way back until 2022 with the Colorado Rockies, where he hit 290. How the hell, if you hit 290, can you not find a job somewhere, even as a bench player next season? I don't understand that. Yeah. David Stearns brought him in on a vet minimum deal, a spring training invite. It was a minor league deal. Doesn't get the call right away. Obviously, Jeff McNeil gets the starting spot. How can you argue with Jeff McNeil not getting the starting spot? We didn't know what we were getting with Jose Iglesias. He comes up, the whole OMG. You can't forget OMG. That was a staple with the sign in the dugout with Sevy and everything. I mean, that was one of the key, I guess, just aura factors of behind this team. One of many this season was OMG. But again, the play on the field, the defense, the sure hands. I mean, with what we got him for in terms of, signing him for on the minor league deal and what the expectations were of Jose Iglesias, even when he was called up, we were like, we need something out of this guy. We're not expecting much, but something. Yep. To do what he did as quick as he did it. I mean, I got to give him the A-, and I'd love to see him back.
Yeah, absolutely. Great job on your all your great information and why you gave him them grades. So yeah, my guy Francisco Lindor, I had his back from day one. People, there was Met fans that didn't want him on his team anymore. People that talked about the contract every single day. Anytime he did something bad, his slow start is a problem. That is something that nobody's going to shy away from, even if you're his biggest supporter like I am. His slow starts, I would love for them to change, but again, all you have to do is go back to his career. He's not a fast starter. He never was in his career. Even when he was young, Francisco Lindor in his early 20s, he's just not a guy who starts well early in the season. He just never was throughout his career. So to expect that is kind of like people not really paying attention to his career. Now, look, we all would love for that to happen. Maybe that would make a tremendous amount of difference. We don't know. But there's nothing more than an A+ from Francisco Lindor. He was your MVP. Didn't get the All-Star bid, didn't get a Gold Glove, not going to get the MVP for Ohtani, even though he should get the MVP. And there's nothing else to say. Excellent defense, clutch hitting. As soon as he got to the leadoff spot, was one of the best players in baseball, if not the best player in baseball. And it was just outstanding from Francisco Lindor. All good things to say about Francisco Lindor. The last thing I'm going to say about him, he's worth every penny. Every freaking penny Steve Cohen paid him. And he tweeted it out about Francisco Lindor, about the money, and that it's basically a bargain what you got Francisco Lindor for what he's done for this team. Not only is he the best shortstop in baseball, one of the best offensive shortstops in baseball, he is the leader of this team, a guy who is not a homegrown Met, became a leader of this team. That's not easy to do, especially with the love affair of Pete Alonso that we'll get to in just a second. Francisco Lindor, outstanding. And now we're going to get to Mr. Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso, boy, oh boy. Man, you made me eat my words in the postseason, but these aren't grades for the postseason. These are grades for the 2024 season. Man, it was it disappointing. His worst season in his career, minus 2020. The RBI, the runners in scoring position were under 200 batting average. Absolutely disgusting. That can't happen. Not for an entire season. That can't happen. And, you know, when pitchers on teams walked guys, weren't afraid to pitch around to get to you as your biggest home run guy, as your biggest RBI guy, that's a huge problem. And, you know, leaving the postseason aside, because that's what we're trying to do, right? We don't want that recency bias, and this is a season grade. I had to give him a D, right? You know, he's been outstanding with the glove. He can pick any ball from any infielder. He makes really good grabs. He get in the hole and all that. He still can't throw the ball.
Minus his throws. I was going to say that's abysmal.
His throws are embarrassing. I mean, we've seen it in the playoffs. I mean, he throws it up in the air. He floats it to Lindor. You know, he almost kills Edwin Diaz running to the bag. Like, that's got to get fixed. But again, if Pete Alonso is going to be a Met going forward and the Mets re-sign him, I have no doubt Pete Alonso will work on that, on his throws, because he worked on his defense every single day. We've seen videos of it. I've been to spring training ever since he came up with the Mets. This guy works his ass off defensively to get better. So I have no doubt he will do everything he can to try to get better at throwing. Now, will practice make it better? We hope so, but it's not always the case. But I know he'll work his ass off. But during the season, he will be getting paid because of his bat. His bat was very disappointing for the Pete Alonso standards. So I'm going to give him a D in the grade for the season. Mark Vientos, NA. The guy, you know, jumped over every hurdle the Mets gave him. You know, basically outperformed Beatty in spring training, didn't get the nod. Thought he was going to be the DH. Basically, you know, a week before spring training ended, the Mets signed JD Martinez. And, you know, the rest is history. He finally got the opportunity because Beatty sucked. And he took off and run it. And he became our biggest, you know, surprise of the season, in my opinion. And, you know, it wasn't that we didn't think he can hit. It was that can his defense hold up for his bat to be in the lineup enough? And it was. Right? Yeah, he had his moments. He has a great arm, and he's only going to get better. And amazing job by Mark Vientos. And, you know, trying to keep the postseason aside, it's very hard to with Mark Vientos. He gets an A anyway, but he was our best postseason performer. That guy had ice in his veins, never nervous in big spots. That's a guy I want up in a big spot. So Mark Vientos gets an A for me. Jeff McNeil, you got to give him a D. The Jeff McNeil batting champion is gone. I'd be shocked if he's on this team next year. You know, I think he's in a similar boat with Starlin Marte, even though Starlin Marte showed life. I think him and Marte are going to be, you know, find a way off this team in the offseason. But just the D for Jeff McNeil. You know, he had a little bit of a resurgence after the All-Star break, but then he got hurt. And that kind of washed up anything. You know, maybe if he kept it going throughout the second half, maybe he would bump up to a C. But overall, a D. I think we agree on that with Jeff McNeil. Jose Iglesias, that's a typo. I had an A+, not B+. If I gave him a B+ and that was factual, I'd probably smack my. You know, you can smack me in the face if you see me. It's an A+. I apologize. It's a typo. What? Look, this team was. We were talking about the chemistry of this team prior to Jose Iglesias. We were talking about the core not being able to work together as a team. Jose Iglesias comes up, OMG happens, he brings everybody together, and he was the spark that set this team in motion throughout the rest of the season, the last 100+ games. So he is the cause of it, not just directly on the field as a player and production, but just bringing the team together as a family. I think meant a hell of a lot, as much as if it to play on the field, and it just all worked together. And look, it took us to Game 6 of the NLCS. So Jose Iglesias, A+ for me. That is a typo. So
I'm still salty he got benched, man. I'm still salty about that.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, we can question the decisions of Mendoza in the NLCS a lot, lineup and rotation. But the last part of the infield and grades is upon us. And Chris, you want me to go first on this one?
Yeah, you got it. You got it.
All right, so let's round up the infield here. And the rest of the infield, right? It starts with JD Martinez, right? We all were excited that JD Martinez was signed by the New York Mets. We thought we needed him behind Pete Alonso, right? That was the protection we needed. JD Martinez was a zero. He had a good stretch. He hit that big home run against the Marlins to win the game, and that seemed to be one of the jump points of the season as well. Had a few good more moments. I think he had, like, I would say about 3, maybe 4 weeks of carrying the team, but that was it. He was a complete zero, lost himself after the All-Star break. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if it's age. I don't know what it is, but he didn't help this team at all. And it was a huge disappointment, because if we would have had the JD Martinez that we had, who carried us for that month, and that we've seen in years past for other teams, specifically the Dodgers, you had that in the postseason, who knows if we would have scored more runs, because he didn't even play. Jesse Winker was our starting DH. That is crazy, the change in JD Martinez, and it's so disappointing, because we were all excited to get him, and he was just out there for the taking, and Stearns finally pulled the trigger, and just an absolute defense for me. And now we get to our starting catcher, Francisco Alvarez, 22 years old. Understand that he's going to go through some growing pains, but it wasn't even the defense that was it was a major issue, but the bat was like non-existent. Even before the thumb injury, he wasn't doing well. The average completely non-existent. Early on it was good, but then it just completely dropped off. The power was basically gone. And that was the hope with Alvarez, is that you can deal with a little bit of the mishaps defensively if this guy can hit you 25 plus home runs. Didn't even do that. And then his defense on top of that was a huge issue. I don't know what got into him, but in the postseason, he started blocking balls. Maybe he was just, I'm not going to call him lazy, because that's not fair to him, but it seemed like it was a lazy approach behind the plate, because in the postseason, he was still sitting on one knee, catching balls. But when he needed to block a ball, he got his ass over there, and it's a whole new catcher. So hopefully he takes that into next season. But just a disappointing all-around season for Francisco Alvarez. Hopefully he can get better and learn from the mistakes. And he started to hit the last 2 games of the postseason, and his defense was really good in the postseason. And you just hope he takes that into next year. But for this year, a D for him. Luis Torrens, I'm giving him a C. Again, he came in there. He was a little bit of a lightning in a bottle. It was, before he came, we couldn't throw out a runner at second base or anywhere. He comes in, and I think it was against the Braves, if I'm not mistaken, where he threw out a couple of guys and got a couple of big hits as well. He's a guy that I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up our backup catcher next year as well. It's the guy that you can always have. He has a great arm. Seems like he can be that tutor to Alvarez, which would be good as well. But I'll give a C to Luis Torrens. And Luisano Acuna got his opportunities, made a couple of nice moments later in the year. I'm going to give him a B. Again, there wasn't a lot of more opportunities later in the year, defensive replacement for the most part. But, he probably will be a part of this team next year in some way or another. I give a B to Luisano Acuna.
Yeah, for me, given the limited opportunities, but him stepping up, right, when Lindor went down with the back injury, what he did in that short burst of time, right? I'm going to give Luisangel Acuna the A, because, like, what other opportunities besides maybe a couple of at-bats, right, meaningless at-bats, or a couple of defensive replacement opportunities did he have? I'm going to give him the A because he stepped up in a major way in the absence of Lindor, and there just really wasn't many opportunities outside of that for him to showcase himself. He's definitely going to be in contention for an infield spot next year. Obviously, it's going to be, up to what happens with, Iglesias and McNeil, and I'm very curious about what the Mets do at second base. You got Ronnie Mauricio hopefully coming back. I've seen some scattered reports about Mauricio and whether he's going to be ready or not. I'm hoping, right, he will, but you just never know after coming off of an ACL. I got to give Luis Angel Acuna the A. I don't think that, he did anything to knock himself down given the limited opportunities. I really don't. Torrens is exactly right. That was, especially with how he came into this organization and the impact that he had immediately, given the Alvarez situation, given that Omar Narvaez was just absolutely pathetic, Luis Torrens did his job, and he did his job well, slowly tapered off as they, shifted Alvarez back into the equation. And therefore, I think he didn't wow you, right? I guess he wowed you for the first week and a half, but after that, he kind of tapered off a little bit with the bat. There was a question whether we should be playing Torrens over Alvarez at one point. Again, was just a little bit silly to me. Like, I didn't really think that was really an option for the Mets. I think that was always going to be Alvarez. But again, I also would expect Torrens to be back as a backup catcher because I think that he is one of the better backup catchers with the bat and with the defense in particular, right? He's got a cannon back there that the league has to offer. Francisco Alvarez, I debated about Francisco Alvarez, and I think I might have been a little bit generous. I think I would probably maybe boot him down a little bit to like a C-, but I'm going to keep it as is, as a C for now. Listen, it was a down season. I mean, I can't sit here and tell you that it wasn't. He hit 7 home runs, right? I mean, that is not even reaching double digits after what you did last season. That's a very bad year. The average was what, 237? The OPS was just a shade over 700.
Yeah.
I graded him, and the reason why I graded him as if he was, an average ball player for the Mets this season was because of his presence behind the plate. Everyone knows what the Mets record is with him behind the plate versus not. Everybody knows that this pitching staff loves working with Francisco Alvarez. They made that clear. They made that known. If you take a look at even the bullpen guys and Ryan Stanek, right? When he got some major outs this season for the Mets, like, there were some wholesome moments between these bullpen pitchers and these starters with Francisco Alvarez, which just goes to show you how much they appreciate his presence behind the plate and the game that he calls. And I think he is well matured beyond his years for a 22-year-old ball player. He did turn it around the last 2 games. He started to sort of shorten up his approach. We all know he can, swing for the fences and be successful. We saw it last season. But there's certain times where you need to adjust your approach, and he didn't do it enough. The bat was lackluster this season. Not going to hold anybody there. Not going to try to argue that. But the defense, I know he's had some trouble blocking baseballs. I think that he set himself up in position, in a good position to steal strikes for his pitchers for the most part this season in terms of his actual framing. But obviously the throwdowns to second, he has the capability. He has the arm to do it. I just don't know what, I'm not sure if it was like the transfers. I'm not sure what was going wrong there. But again, I think that as good as he was defensively, right, in terms of framing in that category, and also just working with the pitchers and calling the baseball game in terms of the pitch selection, he's got more work to do defensively. But again, I think he's impressed us given all the grades that he got coming up and everybody telling us how he's a terrible defender. I think all in all, the version that we've seen from Francisco Alvarez behind the plate has been at least better than what we were told we were going to get when he was first coming up. And then JD Martinez, and Junior saying his framing was the worst that he's seen from him this season. It was probably worse than last season. I will give you that, but I still think that he puts himself in the tape that I've watched. he does the whole go on one leg. And I know that if you're teaching catching, that's probably not the most popular way to teach, catchers to set up behind the plate, but there's a certain aspect of getting out of the umpire's way so he has a clear view of the strike zone, and therefore you might get more calls than not. Anyways, there's a whole science behind it. I wasn't a catcher. I get that some people are never going to buy into that. I get it. I'm not even going to try to get into the catching mechanics because, again, that's one position I never even wanted to touch when I was coming up and playing. So they can have that. I mean, that's for the catching coach and for Francisco Alvarez to figure out. JD Martinez, man, listen, the guy was underwhelming. He's coming off of a year where he hit 33 home runs for the Dodgers. We thought we were going to get him a lot more power. We thought we were finally going to get that impactful bat behind Pete Alonso. I never had the expectation for him to be a main contributor of this season. I just expected more than what we got from him behind Pete Alonso. Again, the distinction between the core versus the rest of the guys on this team in this lineup is very evident. And JD Martinez is not a part of any core, and he was never brought in to be that this season. But he was brought in to be better than what he produced. I will give credit where credit's due, which partly goes into my grade, that he was really one of the first guys, if not the first guy, to kickstart the lackluster Mets offense at the beginning of the season, right? With his play very early on. He was also one of the guys that was a mentor, a leader in the clubhouse, calling a team meeting, right? Speaking up and being a part of that team meeting. Just everything that he did, right? In terms of not being a hitting coach, but also just giving guys advice as if he was a hitting coach, right? I love his approach when he's, feeling good. He's got an all fields approach. We just didn't see his bat looked the slowest that I've ever seen JD Martinez's bat in his entire career. And of course, it happened to be when he was brought in as a New York Met. Of course. But this is also a reason why you don't sign guys that are like 36, 37 years old. But I was singing a different tune before the season. Hell, I wanted Justin Turner even more than JD Martinez, but I was willing to settle for JD Martinez. But again, I had bigger expectations. I think everybody did for JD Martinez. I think he really held it down in more ways than just on the field, and in more ways in the clubhouse than the general public eye gets to sort of see and witness. But again, he didn't have a good season, man. 235, 16 home runs. It's just not the JD Martinez that he's been his whole entire career. So he gets a C- for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's basically it, guys. That's a wrap for the 2024 season as we give our Mets season grades from the coaches to the players. And, that puts a complete wrap on the 2024 season. But there is one more thing left to do, and that is the team overall grade, the season grade for the New York Mets as a whole. I'm going to give them a B+. Right? It was a season where a lot, if not most, didn't have high expectations for this team. A lot of people were picking 75 wins for this team, maybe close to a 500 team, but nothing more than that. I know, Chris, you had 85 wins. I had 85. I had 87 wins. They passed us with 89 wins. It was a really outstanding season, more than probably anybody could have predicted. Game 6 of the NLCS, and it was such a fun season, a season that I will always remember. So many, craziness with OMG, Grimace, Haktua, every freaking thing you could think of. Everything was just going crazy. The freaking playoff pumpkin, everything that you could think of happened in the 2024 season. It's a season to remember, even if it didn't end the way we wanted it to. It was a great season nonetheless. So I give a B+ to the overall team grade for the Mets. What about you, Chris?
I give him an A, man. There's no way that I can't give him an A. I mean, you take a look at where we were in spring training, right? Even in the offseason, everybody's calling David Stearns, mini market Stearns, garbage bin Stearns. Like I hope those people feel silly. I really do. And for me, I had 85, you had 87. I think both of us were being kind of generous. And the reason why I said 85 at that point was because of the JD Martinez signing at that point of the spring training season and when they actually signed him. But you take a look at everything this team had to overcome. The 0-5 start. And you take a look at this roster in general. We just gave our rotation grades. And I just said that in the beginning of the season, the major question mark for me was if the Mets rotation was going to hold up. It wasn't the sexiest of rotations on paper going into the season. And you didn't even have David Peterson to open up the season. You didn't have Kodai Senga opening up the season. There was a lot of things that were working against the New York Mets, and they did work against the New York Mets because guess what? They started off 0-5. They looked abysmal. Citi Field was empty, in some parts of April. They were down to 11 games under 500 before they slowly started to play better. You take a look at the personnel and the roster turnover and the injuries. Brooks Raley, right? Did anyone remember or did anyone forget about the Jorge Lopez situation? About him calling the Mets? Or maybe he said this, I guess we'll never know, right? In terms of what he's actually said. But the worst team or whatever, him throwing the glove into the stands and getting DFA'd right thereafter. We had Jake Diekman. A highlight was him closing out a ball game for us. I believe it was against the Yankees. Jake Diekman, who also shortly after got DFA'd. Adam Ottavino, as bad as he was getting, higher leverage situations at the beginning of the season. There was so much this season, right? We brought in Julio Teheran to start a game in Atlanta. Ladies and gentlemen, do we forget how bad of times it was in mid-May and late April? Did we forget?
Uh-huh.
And to come all the way from that to make an NLCS appearance and take the Dodgers to 6 games, I know it might sound like a moral victory, and I get that a lot of people don't like taking moral victories, and it's a bust if you don't win the championship. I get it. You're certainly entitled to that opinion. But with what I just said, everything that I just said, the adjustments that David Stearns had to make, bringing guys up, sending guys down, the adjustments that Carlos Mendoza then had to make, given the changes in personnel all season long, guys coming, guys going, right? I can't give this season anything less than an A. I'm sorry. It was more memorable. And as hard as it was to say a couple months ago, and I seem kind of crazy for saying it, more enjoyable than 2022, obviously more successful than 2022. Nah, I can't give this. No, A. The magical Mets of 2024 get an A. They didn't, get the job done. They were 2 games shy of punching their ticket to the big show, right? The World Series. They get an A for me, man.
Yeah. B plus A. Just an awesome season. And how could we forget about the infamous Joey Wendell? Oh,
Joey Wendell.
He was out starting third baseman for a little while too. Like, that's crazy. Like, to think, like, how far we come over, a 6-month span. That's why baseball is the most beautiful.
Michael Tonkin.
Yeah, like that's why baseball, when people talk about it's boring, they don't understand the ins and outs of an everyday 162 game season, because your team can look one way in the beginning of the season, can look drastically different, and the Mets are basically the example of 2 different stories in the same season. The rosters were totally different in a matter of months. And that's the beauty of baseball, guys. So that is our Mets season grades. If you want to check all of our grades, we did a 2-hour show, guys. So you got a lot of time. If you got time on your hands, watch the show. Check out our grades. Please comment after the stream if you want to watch it later to check out the other grades. Always hit that like button, guys. Subscribe to the channel. And look, guys, it's a complete wrap of the 2024 season. The streams that we're going to get to now is going to be about the offseason. Are we going to keep guys? Are we going to let guys leave? Free agent acquisitions, trade proposals, possibilities, all that stuff. Off season is ready to go, guys. And I know, Chris, you got something coming up in about 40 minutes or so in regards. If you want to put that plug in right now, let them know.
Yeah, I'm breaking down David Stearns' press conference. Obviously, he gave a couple of quotes about some pending free agents for the Mets. Pete Alonso is one topic of discussion. You know, he kind of said a lot without saying a lot in terms of the potential approach the Mets are going to have to this offseason. So I got a quick little 18-minute video dropping at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, breaking down the latest news coming from David Stern's press conference. Because for me as a Mets fan, and we'll talk about it at some point together, Rob, we'll obviously be doing Mets offseason content together. I'm sure there's a lot of Hot Stove Lives. You know, again, if you don't have the notifications turned on, we can go live at any single minute, right? We're a little bit further away from that point, right? The hot stove season, but I'm anticipating a massive offseason for the New York Mets, and I'm going to tell you all about that at 8 p.m. So again, tap into that. But other than that, so much content on the channel. Rangers, I'll do a Rangers post game tonight. I'm trying to do other sports, right, to keep myself busy. The New York Knicks season, did a stream for them yesterday. So it's not just Mets off-season content, but if you're a Mets fan and you think that I'm not doing Mets off-season content just because I'm talking Rangers and Knicks, you're sadly mistaken. Don't go anywhere. It's going to be a hell of a ride. So yeah, that's my plug for the show and or for the channel, and I appreciate it. And Junior, I mean, the answer is A+ from David Stearns. The answer is A+.
Absolutely.
And by the way, right, this team will be back. This team will be back. No, make no mistake about it.
Absolutely. And guys, I know Chris is going to say the same thing, but I want to thank all you guys for hanging with us throughout the 2024 season. A lot of ups and downs, a lot of negatives early on, a lot of lows early on, but we picked it up and you made the pregame show what it is. It grew tremendously throughout the year, guys, and it's all because of your support. And guys, we ain't going anywhere, right? We'll have pre and post next year, but we have a whole set of shows and videos that we're going to do individually as well during the offseason with breaking news, lives, and all that fun stuff. But the main show will probably be Mets Hot Stove Live. Me and Chris will definitely talk about that when that's going to get started. But check out our channels, guys. Subscribe if you haven't as yet. There's going to be a lot of content throughout the offseason. Just because the season is over doesn't mean that the content goes away. With that said, guys, thank you for supporting us throughout the 2024 season. The Mets 24 season is a wrap. We will see you next time, guys. Have a great night. As always, Met fans, let's go Mets. And we'll see you next time, guys. Have a good night.
Brooklyn to Queens, hear the roar, from laughter to blood in every scar. Living legends made on this ground, from silence we scream, make a sound. Rising high, falling low, repeat again. Cycles of the game, addicted to the pen. Graffiti tales spray on the wall. Met saga, forever stand tall.